Hello, I am Misty Llewellyn, and the country that I am doing is Ecuador for the country project assignment. The Ecuadorian government is officially called the Republic of Ecuador and was originally part of the Inca Empire until it was taken over by the Spanish and eventually gained its independence in 1830. Their capital is Quito, Ecuador, and it is governed by a president named Lenin Moreno. And it's very similar to the democracy of America, with very similar structures. Ecuador's economy is heavily based on petroleum, which accounts for more than half of the earnings and about 25% of the public sector's revenue. Their GDP purchasing power is 182.4 million, making them number 66 in the world. And the majority of the GDP goes to services, which is 59.8%. Compared to the U.S., Ecuador's GDP per capita is $11,264, whereas the U.S. is $55,805. And the population growth of Ecuador is 1.3%, and of U.S. it is 0.8%. So imports of Ecuador are mostly industrial materials, fuels and lubricants, and non-durable consumer goods. Their partners are the U.S., China, Colombia, and Panama, the U.S. being the largest at 27%. And the exports are petroleum, bananas, flowers, shrimp, cocoa, coffee, wood, fish, and their partners are the U.S., also the largest again, being 39.5%, and then Chile, Peru, Vietnam, and Colombia. Compared to the United States, whose imports are agricultural, industrial supplies with crude oil, capital goods, consumer goods, and their partners are mainly China as the highest, and then Canada, Mexico, Japan, and Germany. And then the exports are agricultural goods like soybeans, fruit, corn, and then industrial supplies, capital goods, consumer goods like automobiles and medicine. And then their partners, again, we have Canada, Mexico, China, and Japan. Canada being the highest in this case. Next we have Ecuador compared to the U.S. in the degree of economic freedom, and we'll see that the U.S. is ranked 17th as the most free with an overall score of 76.4, which is near the free zone, which is 80, and Ecuador's rating is 49.3, which is pretty low and in the repressed zone of the overall economy. The U.S. numbers show a lot more freedom. For example, financial freedom. The U.S. has 40 higher points. The tax burden on Ecuadorians is actually 13 points higher than those of the U.S. And when you look at it for the business freedom, it's clear that the U.S. has much more freedom. And property rights are repressed in Ecuador, scoring almost 33 points lower than the U.S. score. So the geography of Ecuador is, it's located in the western part of South America with the Pacific Ocean to its west, Peru to its south and east, and then Colombia to the north. This also includes the Galapagos Islands, which are a couple miles off of the mainland, and it's a small island chain on the west coast. The country is about the size, a little bit smaller than Nevada, and it's comprised of tropical coast, the Amazonian jungles, and cooler inlands and highlands from the Andes Mountains. The main crops and livestock of Ecuador the main crops are bananas and plantains, coffee and cocoa, rice, potatoes, cassava, sugarcane, and balsa wood, and then their main livestock is cattle, which makes them beef and dairy, sheep, pigs, and then shrimp. Ecuador's agricultural role in the GDP compared to the U.S. The U.S. GDP of 2017 was 19.027 billion, which was 3.4% up from last quarter, and then Ecuador's GDP was 118 billion, which was 1.5% up after 5 quarters of below zero, which is pretty good. The U.S.'s output of America's farms had a share of GDP at 136.7 billion, which is about 1% of the GDP, whereas Ecuador's was about 1.3 billion, which was about 0.0013% of the overall GDP. Some of the agricultural and environmental related problems would be, so like what they do for their main agricultural practices is the slash and burn method to make more land, but this is a problem because it's causing deforestation, and that's not good at all. It used to be done by indigenous tribes, but it was very controlled, very small, and then when colonialization came over, it started to really hurt the country. A lot of people use subsistence farming, and that's mostly used in smaller communities and mountainous regions, largely with indigenous cultures, and this is just them making food for themselves. But agriculture is used largely for like supply and export of food to other countries, as exporting is one of their main ways to get money. Some environmental concerns and problems is deforestation, which is we talked about earlier. There are barely any forest in Ecuador anymore. They're being taken away to supply other places. Desertification, which is mainly from overgrazing, climate change, loss of agriculturally productive soils. This is especially hurting the Galapagos, as there are goats which are invasive, and they are hurting what they eat because they're eating all of the grass. Another huge problem is water pollution with the oil companies, especially Chevron, because they have been dumping 18 billion gallons of toxic waste and oil into the Amazon and other bodies of water in Ecuador. As talked about earlier, deforestation is really hurting the country, but the government has started to put forth protocols to fix that, and part of it actually came from Chevron owed the Ecuadorian government $18 billion because of what they did to their country. So they are using that to put in eco-friendly buses and help with land and getting it back to how it used to be, and water and soil, because a lot of that has been hurt over the past years. With emissions to the U.S., Ecuador for nitrous oxide emissions is 85.6%, and the U.S. is 57.6%, so that is a pretty big difference. And agricultural methane emissions in Ecuador are 64.9%, and in the U.S. 35.9%, which again is a pretty big difference. Biotechnology in Ecuador is not really used too much. They allow it on some crops, but not for commercialized uses. They did sign the Cartagena Protocol in 2000 on May 24th, and the entry was September 11th, 2003. They have now started placing labels on things that are genetically modified, but the country does not export any genetically modified goods because they don't really make them, but they do import a lot, especially from Argentina and the U.S. So they're trying to figure out how to incorporate that so that it's safe for their people. It also makes it so there were some indigenous and environmental groups that were protesting biotechnology, but that has since gone down significantly, since now all of the food that uses it has to be labeled as such. But the main problem with it is the laws are so vague. Like, a good amount of people don't mind it, but the laws against it are so vague that people don't know what to do, such as one law that says it can't be dangerously used, but they do not say what dangerous is in that category. So conclusions and recommendation, I would say that Ecuador is working very hard on making sure that it is environmentally protected again, and the damage that has been done to their country over the amount of time is fixed. And there are many laws being enacted so that this can be fixed by the government, and them getting money, especially from the Chevron company, to help and fix that. I think that Ecuador needs to find a balance between their protecting land and their growing economy, because more people are starting to live there. It also needs involvement and protecting social advances of the oil boom, because that is a main thing that is hurting them. People need to know more about macroeconomics so that they can protect all groups of people there, because it's not the most rich country. Investments need to increase capital and labor. The private sector could also be able to have more control rather than what's going on right now, because a lot of people don't have control, and that could help diversify the economy and increase production and get more jobs, better jobs. And they can continue to enforce the changes that have made in the 2008 Constitution with fixing their lands and stuff, because it will help create new environmental practices in the environment and restore their country back to what it was, with the deforestation as much as they can.